V. Madison questions today. Make that a priority over the weekend. I need it Monday. The marking period progress report ends today. And if I don't have it Monday, you're going to get a 0 on the assignment. So I need it Monday if you want credit for it for the progress report. Everybody clear on that? All right, so I thought yesterday I created a pretty concise video to talk about the War of 1812. The War of 1812 really didn't settle a heck of a lot, but it did establish the United States, when it was all said and done, and it did establish the United States as a world power that was not going to go back to being a British colony. The United States emerged as a world power after the War of 1812. The War of 1812 gave the United States a boost in morale and confidence. Today we're going to talk about the aftermath, the effects of the War of 1812 on both the United States and on Native Americans. All right? They will have profound impacts on both. Off the video to start things today.
The War of 1812, which ended in late 1814 and early 1815, was an unusual war in that, in the end, nothing changed. As a result of the war, which was essentially a draw, the United States and Great Britain agreed to go back to the situation between the two nations in 1812. But the war did have significant results. First of all, it was America's second War of Independence. For the second time, the United States had successfully fended off the British armies and navies. So a great deal of pride and nationalism emerged from the war among the American people. Second, because trade was cut off during the war between the United States and Great Britain, and effectively between the United States and France as well, because of the strength of the British Navy, the United States was forced to develop its own manufacturing sector, that is, to build mills and factories and begin developing American industries so it was no longer as dependent on the British for purchasing manufactured goods. So the War of 1812, even though it didn't have significant changes as a result of the treaty, did have a significant effect on American history.
And we're going to talk about those two things. We're going to talk about how it's going to boost American morale after the war ends, and how it's finally going to establish the United States as an independent power, but it's also going to have an impact on the American economy. And we're going to see how exactly. Recapping here, the Treaty of Ghent, signed in 1814, ending the War of 1812. It declared the war a draw with no territorial changes, really, for either side. It restored pre-war boundaries between the U.S. and British territories. The unique thing about the Treaty of Ghent is signed in 1814, and the significance of that is that there was actually a battle that was fought after the Treaty of Ghent was signed in December of 1814 because of the lull in getting information across the Atlantic. The Battle of New Orleans will be fought, but the Treaty of Ghent was signed in 1814, ending the war. Battle of New Orleans is fought a few weeks after the treaty is signed, and what's important about the Battle of New Orleans is that General Andrew Jackson is going to lead the American to victory over the British, a crushing victory, a crushing blow to the British at New Orleans. And that battle, while taking place after the war had ended, is going to boost American morale and enthusiasm and nationalism. And it's also going to, I love this word, it's going to catapult Jackson into the national psyche. It's going to really establish Jackson as a capable and a qualified leader. He will use that fame and that glory to kind of propel himself to the presidency not long thereafter. So the Battle of New Orleans fought after the treaty is signed. Okay, Americans really had no casualties at the Battle of New Orleans, and the British were swamped at the Battle of New Orleans. Economic independence. The war disrupted trade with Great Britain. Here are some things that are going to happen, and your video and your author made this a point. Key thing to know here about the war and how it disrupted trade with Britain, because because the states could no longer trade with Britain or France during the war, the United States, by virtue of that lack of trade, is going to be forced to do what? They're going to be forced to start to increase manufacturing domestically. The United States is going to start building factories and manufacturing their own goods. So it was kind of a blessing in the sense that the War of 1812, because it cut off trade with Britain and France, it's going to force the United States to look kind of inward, and it's going to boost American economic production. Okay, it's going to lead to building of factories, especially in the Northeast, especially in the states in New England and the upper middle states. It's really going to lead to an increased domestic manufacturing, and it's going to help establish economic independence for the United States. Now that they don't have to rely on trade anymore with Britain or France, the United States is going to become economically independent as well. And that's going to benefit, as you might imagine, the northern states where factories are starting to emerge. We talked a little bit earlier in the week. We're not going to see growth of factories in the American South. Simply, why? Why are the factories ever going to be kind of limited to blossoming in the north?
The South is of agriculture.
South is plantation farming and agriculture, and the South is not really willing to invest their money, their profits, in factories. They want to invest their profits in land and in slaves. Yeah. And the South is going to have to start buying from the North, which is going to result in the South becoming dependent on the North, which is going to lead to bitterness and, what's that S word?
Oh,
What's that S word between North and South?
no.
Not segregation,
Separation.
sectionalism. Sectionalism, all right? Sectionalism, all right? So keeping in the review mode here, let's close out the notes on that page and go to the next slide. Let's talk about probably the most embarrassing thing that happened to the Federalists during the war. Before the treaty is signed, a group of Federalists from the New England states, largely, are going to call for a convention at Hartford, Connecticut. All right. Now, the Federalists are unhappy that they can't trade primarily with England. The Federalists are unhappy that trade and their economy is being destroyed by the lack of being able to export and import with England. So, Federalists are going to meet in December, around Christmas, a couple of weeks before Christmas, in Hartford, Connecticut. And at the convention, the Federalists are defending the states' rights, and they're threatening to secede. You have northern states threatening to secede over this, their anger at not being able to trade. Their economy is suffering in the northern states, and a group of Federalists are going to threaten to secede. This is coming less than a month before the war actually will end, and the Federalists are going to have egg on their face because it's going to make them look like traitors. It's going to make them, when they start talking secession at this convention, secession over leaving the country because they can't trade and they're losing money over the loss of trade, the Federalists are going to start to look like traitors, and they're going to look like they're committing acts of treason. This is going to mark the decline of the Federalist Party. Federalist Party will never be as powerful as it was before 1814. The Federalist Party is going to lose its power and its influence after 1814. And this is going to be largely because the war ends in January of 1815, or actually December when the treaty's signed. The war ends and everything kind of gets back to normal when the war ends, and the Federalists are basically standing there looking like fools because they had called for secession. Everybody know what secession means? Secession, when they call for secession, Alyssa, they're basically threatening to leave the country. They're threatening, those states are saying, we are going to leave the Union. And that was a very, very, very serious threat. Another time that will happen will be in 1860, when a group of states actually leave the Union when President Lincoln is elected. And that act on the part of 7 southern states will result in what? The American Civil War. So this term secession is basically northern states threatening to leave the Union over their unhappiness with President Madison and the war going on with Great Britain. They're unhappy that the war is going on, and they're unhappy that their pocketbooks are being hurt because they can't trade with England. While war's going on, you're not trading with your enemies. The United States will not allow trade with their enemies, so the Federalists in the northern states are getting very angry, so they call for secession, which is a very, very serious threat. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. All right, let's go to the video. Hartford Convention. This is one of my teacher colleagues. He's pretty interesting, this guy. You'll like him.
After the peace treaty ending the war had been signed, but hey, that's not Jackson's fault. Again, no Twitter, hashtag 1815 problems. The Treaty of Ghent, which ended the war, proved just how necessary the war had been, not at all. No territory changed hands. When negotiations started in August 1814, the British asked for northern Maine, demilitarization of the Great Lakes, and some territory to create an independent nation for the Indians in the Northwest, but none of that happened. Not because the U.S. was in a particularly good negotiating position, but because it would have been awkward for Great Britain to carve out pieces of the U.S. and then tell Russia and Prussia that they couldn't take pieces of Europe for themselves to celebrate their victory in the Napoleonic Wars. There were no provisions in the treaty about impressment or free trade, and basically the treaty returned everything to the status quo, so neither the US nor Britain actually won. But the Indians, who suffered significant casualties and gave up even more territory.
So true or false, neither the U.S. or Great Britain actually won with the outcome of the War of 1812. True. Now, but the United States will benefit, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. The United States certainly will benefit, but the war militarily is kind of a draw.
Definitely lost. So with a treaty like that, the war must have had a negligible impact on American history, right? Except no, the War of 1812 confirmed that the U.S. would exist. Britain would never invade America again until 1961. I mean, the U.S. were good customers, and Great Britain was happy to let them trade as long as that trade wasn't helping a French dictator.
Did you guys catch the joke there? Britain will never invade the United States again until 1961. Did you guys see who was pictured there? You had to be quick.
Britain was happy to let them trade as long as that trade wasn't helping a French dictator. The war launched in 1961. I mean, the U.S. were good customers. Would exist. Britain would never invade America again until 1961. I mean,
yeah, the British invasion, 1961. When the Eagles came to, or when the Beatles came to the United States, and their careers took off.
The U.S. were good customers, and Great Britain was happy to let them trade as long as that trade wasn't helping a French dictator. The war launched Andrew Jackson's career and solidified the settlement and conquest of land east of the Mississippi River, and our lack of success in Canada reinforced Canadian nationalism while also ensuring that instead of becoming one great nation, we would forever be Canada's pants. The war also spelled the end of the Federalist Party, which tried in 1815 with the Hartford Convention to change the Constitution. In retrospect, the Hartford Convention proposals actually look pretty reasonable. They wanted to eliminate the clause wherein black people were counted as 3/5 of a human and require a 2/3 congressional majority to declare war. But because they had their convention right before Jackson's victory at New Orleans, they only came off looking unpatriotic and out of touch, as the elite so often do. It's hard to argue that Americans really won the War of 1812, but we felt like we won, and nothing unleashes national pride like war winning. The nationalistic fervor that emerged in the early 19th century was, like most things, good news for some and bad news for others. But what's important to remember, regardless of whether you're an American, is that after 1812, the United States saw itself not just as an independent nation, but as a big player on the world stage. For better and for
U.S. saw increased or decreased levels of national pride after the war. Increased levels, good.
better and for worse, that's a gig we've held on to. And no matter how you feel about America's international interventions, you need to remember it didn't begin in Afghanistan or even Europe. It started with freaking Canada. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.
All right.
Crash Course is produced and directed by Stan Mower.
Recap on the events from the Hartford Convention and the Treaty of Ghent. So, Treaty of Ghent marks the demise or the end of the Federalists in the United States. Okay? Federalists will never be as powerful again, and actually after the war, the Federalist Party will effectively be no more in the United States. Your picture, your slide, tell me if there's a picture of a couple of modern presidents on this slide. Okay, good, I deleted it. Originally there was a couple of pictures. I don't know why it automatically dragged a picture, but it included a picture of two modern Republican presidents, Reagan and George W. Bush. That is a different Republican Party, but the Republicans here are going to emerge. Jefferson and Madison's party are going to merge, and Republicans are going to shift support to nationalism, and they're going to start to advocate for a broad interpretation of the Constitution. Also, the Republicans are going to promote unity and a strong federal government. So, oddly, after the war ends, the Democratic Republicans are going to start to assume a lot of the same characteristics of the Federalist Party. They're going to support heavily the idea of nationalism. They're going to advocate for a broad interpretation of the Constitution, meaning when the Constitution is read, Democratic Republicans are now going to see the Constitution as a document that can be interpreted in more than one way, not just the way it was written. They're looking at a broad interpretation. Most importantly, the Democrat Republicans promoted national unity and a strong federal government. When the country was first established, guys like Jefferson and Madison and the Virginians, they didn't want a strong federal government. But now, after the War of 1812, you've got the Federalists losing power, and you've got the Democratic Republicans now promoting a strong federal government. We know that the Anti-Federalists originally wanted what? A weak central government. Now they're claiming to support a strong federal government. All right. Impact on U.S. politics. Again, the War of 1812. Impact on U.S. politics. Federalists and Republicans are going to exchange roles. Federalists' influence is going to wane after the war. That term wane, I don't take anything for granted. The term wane means diminish. If influence wanes, it means that they're diminishing. And Republicans emerged as the dominant political force after the War of 1812. Republicans emerge as the dominant political force. Now, it won't stay that way for long. They will have a competitor. The Republican Party will have a competitor that will emerge, and we'll see in the coming weeks how that happens. But for the time being, after the war, the Democratic Republicans, or the Republicans for short, are the major political party, and they feel pretty good about things. The country's at peace after the War of 1812. The economy's starting to click. Agriculture, people are growing lots of crops, and trade is opening up again. And in the north, factories are starting to become more and more common, and people are manufacturing goods, and Americans are being able to buy goods from American manufacturers, from American factory makers, and this is going to help the northern economy especially. But it's going to lead to that S word, the growing S between north and south. What do we call that? Sectionalism. Sectionalism. Questions to consider. All right, I'm going to throw these by you really quick. How does the Treaty of Ghent impact U.S. and Britain relations? The Treaty of Ghent that ended the war effectively declared the war a draw, and no side gained anything possession-wise. No side gained anything possession-wise. The conditions that existed before the war go back. So the Treaty of Ghent ends the fighting, and Britain and the United States, neither one really wins. But why was the Battle of New Orleans significant despite occurring after the treaty? Somebody tell me. We talked a little bit about this today. Why fight a battle, and what was the significance, especially for one individual, after the Battle of New Orleans, Katie? Whose career did it establish? Andrew Jackson's career will be established as a military leader, and he will kind of parlay that into eventually becoming a U.S. president. The long-term effects of the war on American manufacturing. Guys, if there's one thing I want you to glean from this slide, Farley. There's one thing I want you to glean from that slide, it is American manufacturing. American manufacturing is going to become very, very important, because when trade shut down with Britain and France, the United States took the bull by the horns and started to manufacture its own goods. The United States became economically independent. Economically independent. The U.S. becomes economically independent. They don't have to rely on everybody else around the world for imports. They can now start to make their own. Now, there's some things we're going to continue to trade for. Clearly, there's some items, manufacturing items, that we're going to import. But the War of 1812 was kind of a blessing because it allowed American businesses to start to emerge and grow. Capiche? All right. Economic changes. Shift from reliance on British goods to domestic production. Okay? The United States will start to depend on its own production for the manufactured goods. American industries and factories are going to grow, and there's going to become an increased self-sufficiency and economic resilience. Americans are going to start to develop, after the War of 1812, a lot of confidence and what I call, this wasn't in your book, but I call this, Americans start to develop a can-do spirit. And this can-do spirit exists to this day. Americans don't like to be told that they can't do something. Americans don't, and just like a lot of human beings, if someone tells you you can't do something, a lot of us have in our makeup, a lot of us have in our minds, that if someone tells us we can't accomplish something, that is kind of like that's like the fire that is lit under us that can do what? That can help us accomplish it. Okay? I don't like being told I can't accomplish anything. If somebody has the audacity to say, well, you can't get that chapter read by the end of the week, well, so I'm done. If I have to get it done, I'll get it done. All right? Americans, especially economically, start to establish this can-do. They're going to find a way to get things done. And if you look at Americans today, especially in the economy, manufacturing and in industry, I was talking with my 7th graders today, just permission to tell a short story. Can I tell you guys a short 7th grade story? So we're looking at Mount Rushmore today. Mount Rushmore was built in the early 20th century. It took about 15 years to build. You got 4 presidents on a mountain in the American West. And the 4 presidents literally are carved in the side of a mountain. Their faces. You've got Jefferson, you've got Washington, you've got Teddy Roosevelt, and you've got Abe Lincoln, carved in the side of a mountain. I want you to think about this for a second. Imagine the difficulty and the challenge of having to climb 700 steps every day to go up on the side of a mountain and blast with dynamite and chisel with stone and carve and to come up with the images of 4 men on a side of a mountain, and those images are strikingly similar to what these men look like in real life. That is a hell of an accomplishment. That, in my view, represents the can-do spirit of America. Americans don't want to be told they can't do something. If you're an art student, and I know I got some artists in here because I see a lot of you doodling a lot, especially my 7th graders, they oh my God, they're always doodling. If you're an artist, if you can create something from scratch with your hand, work on mastering that, because that is a skill that not a lot of people have. Not a lot of people have. Can-do spirit, all right? Economic changes. Let's go to the next slide. Political shifts. Federalists decline, Republicans rise. So Federalist Party after the war is going to start to diminish, and the Republicans' fortunes are going to rise. Again, we're not talking same Republican Party today. Much different Republican Party, but this is the Democratic Republicans, the party of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Changes in party platforms and policies are going to happen, and the political shift is there's going to be a huge influence on future American politics after the War of 1812. A huge influence, okay? Huge influence in the area right after the war. Federalists decline and Republicans rise. Changes in party platforms and policies, and we're going to see an influence on future American politics. And Americans are going to feel good about themselves after the War of 1812. They're going to be at peace in 1815. Americans are going to start to feel confident about their economy, and when the economy's booming and America is at peace, people generally feel pretty good, and that's going to usher us in to what's called a what? An era of good feelings. After the War of 1812, we're going to see what's described as a period of time called the era of good feelings. Okay? Jefferson, president number 3. Madison, president number what? 4. Okay? Era of good feelings. All right? We're also going to foster a sense of national identity. The war is going to create an immense amount of national pride. The teacher video I shared with you a moment ago, my buddy Jeff, he said that there's nothing like a war to help a country develop pride. War oftentimes brings the nation together. When a country's at war, the country kind of mobilizes behind the country. So war fostered a sense of national pride. It strengthened American identity and unity. And it encouraged, guys, biggie here, real biggie, the war is going to further encourage westward expansion across the continent. It's going to further encourage westward expansion across the continent. And what I like most about this here is defeating the British for the second time has given the Americans a sense of, I don't want to say invincibility, but it boosted Americans' confidence, where Americans started to have a little strut, and Americans started to kind of feel that nobody's going to mess with us. Nobody's going to mess with us. America started to have some confidence after the War of 1812. Yes, the war did not result in America gaining any territory. Yes, it was technically a draw. But when you fight the world's most powerful nation to a draw for the second time, it's going to instill confidence. It's going to instill confidence, and it's going to do that, all right? And it's going to instill national pride. Questions? Legacy of the War of 1812. I will ask you guys this to do the following. I'm going to finish this slide, and then just over the weekend, access your PowerPoint at home and just watch the video I placed on the turning point for the Native Americans, why the War of 1812 was a turning point. But the legacy, the after effects, it's going to establish the U.S. as a resilient nation, a nation that can bounce back from challenges. If you are resilient, you can bounce back from challenges. It demonstrated the ability to defend its sovereignty. Sovereignty is basically the nation's independence and its freedom. And the War of 1812, if anything else, it showed Britain and the rest of the world that the United States was not going to be a pushover. The United States was not going to be a country that European nations or anybody else was going to be able to have their way with. If they were going to beat the United States, they're going to have to beat them fair and square. So it demonstrated our ability to defend our sovereignty, and it set the stage for future growth and development. The War of 1812 is pivotal for setting the stage for future growth and development of the country. A lot's going to happen in a short period of time after the War of 1812. I'm just going to put two dates up here. War of 1812 ends in 1815, and between 1815 and 1860, there's going to be a boatload of things happening in the United States. There's going to be a ton of things going on in the United States as a direct result of the end of the war, and it's going to happen in a flash. A lot's going to happen in that 45-year block. All right? A lot's going to happen in that 45-year block. Lastly, I'll just talk about these real quick. Summarize key points from the presentation, discuss the war's impact on American society and politics, and reflect on how the war shaped the future of the United States. I'm going to ask you all to make sure you watch this over the weekend. It's going to talk about the big loser in the war. The United States was a winner. Britain, you can say Britain was They fought to a draw. They were kind of a winner. The big loser were Native Americans. Because America is now going to continue its expansion westward, Native Americans are going, because yesterday we talked about Tecumseh in the video, yes, the Tecumseh Confederacy, and how he joined the Indians together to kind of, well, once that Confederacy is destroyed, Native Americans will forever be swimming upstream and traveling uphill against American oppression. All right, so